Chapter 7. Their attitude to gold and silver. For this end they have an incredible treasure, but they do not keep it as treasure, but in such a manner as I am almost afraid to tell, lest you think it is so extravagant as to be hardly credible. This I have the more reason to apprehend, because, if I had not seen it myself, I could not have been easily persuaded to believe it upon any man's report. It is certain that all things appear incredible to us in proportion as they differ from known customs. But one who can judge aright will not wonder to find that since their constitution differs so much from ours, their value of gold and silver should be measured by a very different standard. For since they have no use for money amongst themselves, but keep it as a provision against events which seldom happen, and between which there are generally long intervening intervals, they value it no further than it deserves, that is, in proportion to its use, so that it is plain they must prefer iron either to gold or silver, for men can no more live without iron than without fire or water. But nature has marked out no use for the other metals so essential as not easily to be dispensed with. The folly of men has enhanced the value of gold and silver because of their scarcity, whereas, on the contrary, it is their opinion that nature, as an indulgent parent, has freely given us all the best things in great abundance, such as water and earth, but has laid up and hid from us the things that are vain and useless. If these metals were laid up in any tower in the kingdom, it would raise a jealousy of the prince and the senate, and give birth to that foolish mistrust into which people are all apt to fall. A jealousy of their intending to sacrifice the interest of the public to their own private advantage. If they should work it into vessels or any sort of plate, they fear that the people might grow too fond of it, and be unwilling to let that plate be run down, if a war made it necessary to employ it in their paying their soldiers. To prevent all these inconveniences, they have fallen upon an expedient which, as it agrees with their other policy, so it is very different from ours, and will scarce gain belief among us who value gold so much and lay it up so carefully. They eat and drink out of vessels of earth or glass, which make an agreeable appearance, though formed of brittle materials, while they make their chamber pots and close stools of gold and silver, and that not only in their public halls, but in their private houses. Of the same metals they likewise make chains and fetters for their slaves, to some of which, as a badge of infamy, they hang an earring of gold, and make others wear a chain or a coronet of the same material. And thus they take care by all possible means to render gold and silver of no esteem. And from hence it is that while other nations part with their gold and silver as unwillingly as if one tore out their bowels, those of Utopia would look on their giving in all they possess of those metals, when there were any use for them, but as the parting of a trifle, or as we would esteem the loss of a penny. They find pearls on their coasts, and diamonds and carbuncles on their rocks, but they do not look after them. But, if they find them by chance, they polish them, and with them they adorn their children, who are delighted with them, and glory in them during their childhood. But when they grow to years and see that none but children use such baubles, they, of their own accord, without being bid by their parents, lay them aside, and would be as much ashamed to use them afterwards as children among us, when they come to years, are of their puppets and other toys. I never saw a clearer instance of the opposite impression that different customs make on people than I observed in the ambassadors of the Animolians, who came to Amaro when I was there. As they came to treat of the affairs of great consequence, the deputies from several towns met together to wait for their coming. The ambassadors of the nations that lie near Utopia, knowing their customs and that fine clothes are in no esteem among them, that silk is despised, and gold is the badge of infamy, used to come very modestly clothed. But the Animalians, lying more remote, and having had very little commerce with them, understanding that they were coarsely clothed, and all in the same manner, took it for granted that they had none of those fine things among them, of which they made no use, and they, being a vainglorious rather than a wise people, resolved to set themselves out with so much pomp that they should look like gods, and strike the eyes of the poor Utopians with their splendour. Thus 3 ambassadors made their entry with 100 attendants, all clad in garments of different colours, and the greater part in silk. The ambassadors themselves, who were of the nobility of their country, were in cloth of gold, and adorned with massy chains, earrings, and rings of gold. Their caps were covered with bracelets set full of pearls and other gems. In a word, they were set out with all those things that among the Utopians were either the badges of slavery, the marks of infamy, or the playthings of children. It was not unpleasant to see, on the one side, how they looked big when they compared their rich habit with the plain clothes of the Utopians, who had come out in great numbers to see them make their entry, and, on the other hand, to observe how much they were mistaken in the impression which they hoped this pomp would have made on them. It appeared so ridiculous a show to all that had never stirred out of their country, and had not seen the customs of other nations, that though they paid some reverence to those that were the most meanly clad, as if they had been the ambassadors, yet when they saw the ambassadors themselves so full of gold and chains, that they looked on them as slaves, and forbore to treat them with reverence. You might have seen the children, who were grown big enough to despise their playthings, and had thrown away their jewels, call to their mothers, push them gently, and cry out, "See that great fool that wears pearls and gems as if he were yet a child," while their mothers very innocently replied, "Hold your peace, this is, I believe, one of the ambassador's fools." Others censured the fashion of their chains, and observed that they were of no use, for they are too slight to bind their slaves, who could easily break them, and, besides, hung so loose about them, they thought it easy to throw theirs away, and to get from them. But, after the ambassadors had stayed a day among them, and saw so vast a quantity of gold in their houses, which was as much despised by them as it was esteemed by other nations, and beheld more gold and silver in the chains and fetters of one slave than all their ornaments amounted to, their plumes fell, and they were ashamed of all that glory for which they had formed value themselves, and accordingly laid it aside. A resolution that they immediately took when, on their engaging in some free discourse with the Utopians, they discovered their sense of such things and of their other customs.